All right, we are at session 4 of this incredible workshop. It's always extremely entertaining. I will be paying attention to time. Each speaker will have 8 minutes. Do you guys know the order in which you're going to present? All right, so why don't you guys start, and I'll be keeping time.
Hello, I'm Zina, and I'm going to talk about the inconsistency of CVSS. This is joint work with Julia Wunder, Andreas Kurz, Christian Eichenmüller, who is also here, and Frau Gassmann. And of course, the first thing is what is CVSS? It's Common Vulnerability Scoring System, which is a widely used industry standard for assessing severity of vulnerabilities. And so it consists of 8 metrics with predefined values. And so here you can see the official CVSS calculator. For example, if the vulnerability can be exploited from the internet, you set the attack vector metric to network. If the vulnerability can only be exploited from the local network or from the same machine, you set the attack vector metric to local. Yeah, and so you set all the metrics, and well, they're all set. A formula behind this computes a value, and it also tells you how the qualitative severity of the vulnerability. So here you can see the vulnerability as high severity. So what is the problem? The problem is that specification of CVSS says that it should be agnostic to who evaluates. Yeah, so this is excerpt from the specification. No matter if it's security analyst, software vendor, whatever. And but in practice, so people who use CVSS know that that different people compute different scores. So we wanted to evaluate how exactly does it happen, and what are the reasons. So we conducted a survey with 200 participants who evaluated 8 carefully selected security vulnerabilities, most of them in the top 3 common weaknesses enumeration, another industry standard, most dangerous list. And we also ran a follow-up study where we asked participants to return, and they evaluated the same vulnerabilities to see if the evaluation of the same participant are consistent over time. Okay, so we put a lot of effort into developing the survey. We first discussed with experienced CVSS researchers, CVSS users, about problems that could arise, and about problematic vulnerabilities and metrics. And then we ran a preliminary study to choose vulnerabilities, and then we ran the main and the follow-up study. And we not only asked participants to evaluate the vulnerabilities, we also asked them to rate, for example, usability of CVSS, and the experience with CVSS and with documentation of CVSS and things like this, to determine factors that might be important for consistency. Okay, so these are results, and you can see the severity of vulnerabilities are very interestingly distributed, and they're definitely not consistent. Yeah? And also, evaluation of the same evaluator over time are not consistent, where 1/3 to half of our participants chose different severity than they chose the first time. Okay, so if we dive a little bit into the details, so for example, there is a vulnerability type called out of bounds, right? It is very persistent. It has been in the CWE list for years, and in the last 2 years it was top 1. So you can see that attack vector metric causes a lot of problems. Yeah, so this is not consistently evaluated. And for example, user interaction metric causes problems in cross-site scripting, which is CWE top 2. And there is one metric that is never consistently evaluated. And we asked participants to comment on their evaluations. And so one of the comments explained this very good, yeah? If you ask 10 people for their opinion, you get 10 coin tosses on this scope metric. It's just not understandable. Okay, so we also trying to determine factors, did some regression analysis. So it looks that no influence of age, CVSS experience, and knowledge of CVSS documentation could be discovered. It's also not surprising because over 30% of participants have never seen the documentation. And but there is an influence. So if people actually consult documentation when they assess vulnerabilities, then they get better results. And one participant's very summarized, up to the point summarized our results. Yes, this is like democracy, the worst system available except for all other systems ever tried. And yeah, and just to brag for people who understand this, we got Distinguished Paper Award in Auckland for this. And there are two-thirds, so the next version of CVSS came out last year, and it is even more complex. It has more metrics with more options, and it says that it's very usable. So we are now running a survey to verify this claim. So I hope that I can distribute it to you via email list, and you can maybe distribute it further, because we are looking for participants also for this survey on daily work on system administrators, which I would also like to send to you. Thank you.
And with 1 minute to spare, Jean, you're up next. Good job, Zina. Thank you.
Does the clicker work yet?
Yes.
Yay.
Switch up.
Labels.
Up left, it's the left.
Left.
There you go. That one, or the
There's
the PowerPoint is down below, right below the. There it is.
Here we go. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Jean, and it has been 0 days since I've had resisted the urge to have too many slides. So this work is with Xinyan Ma. She's going to graduate next year, so hire her quick while you have the chance. So this work is about labels, because we know from Ross Anderson that security markets are hard and they don't work currently. And we know from Ashton Carter that the best fight, the best war, is the one you don't get in. So I am kind of the lousiest honor either one of these people ever had is this presentation. So there are 3 reasons for lack of security and privacy. Rational choice, I don't care because I shouldn't, because I get nothing out of it. Usability, I care, oh my God, what are you asking me to do? And market failure, I would care, but what should I do? So that has 3 corresponding questions. What content do people want if you have a label? Which labels are usable, efficient, easiest to comprehend? And if they're usable, and if they align with rational choice, will people pay money? So rational choice, here's a listing of the smallest SBOM version 2. Whoa, so that's easy to read. And here is half of the combinations of the best practices for IoT and software, because I just didn't have the heart to put all 72 on there. So what we did is we took all of these and then we asked people, hey, is this important, most important, least important, not important? So, so you dragged a little card onto the associated device, and then we came up with a top 10 list. We put a QR code there because labels are supposed to have QR codes. Nobody knows what's going to be behind the QR code. We put an S-bomb. And so we can't, there is some consensus on what people want. Well, are they usable? So the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark is a binary label. There is the nutrition style label that gives you a lot of details. There's the 5-lock label that has the list of 10 things in the first QR code and the S-bomb in the second. And then there's the Universal Laboratories We Think We Are United Frequent Flyers label. So these are the two-layer labels. So these are the labels with QR codes. And then we asked people, hey, what's the most secure device? And we randomized, and everyone used each label at least once. The mapping between the device and the label was randomized. So what's the most secure? Thermostat. People were pretty accurate. You know, you can look at the control was pretty much 25, 25, 25. Thank you. And the 5-lock label was easy. We measured timeliness. People were fast with the 5 locks and the NASA TLX. And people were like, hey, we like it. It's easy to use. We said, did you use the QR codes? People were like, yeah, we used the QR codes. They did not use the QR codes. We had like 100 people say, yeah, I used that QR code. And we're like, we looked. No. And so, but we didn't say that today. Which is the best label? Which label do you like? And they changed their minds a lot. They said at the beginning, ooh, I like this nutrition style label. They used it, and then they were like, oh, that is too much information. People mostly don't do prior research. They do communicate efficiently at time of purchase. Privacy and security are not necessarily distinguished. They're ranked higher. And QR code intention was low, but still higher than actual use. So, then we did an experiment only with the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark because the U.S. government said it will be the Cyber Trust Mark. So we said, okay, that's what we'll ask about. 6 groups, 600 participants, 3 purchase questions, 1 purchase question where we told them you're going to Amazon. We said, hey, here's $15. We're going to give you $15. You have to spend part of that on a smart light bulb. And they agreed. And then we, tried to get a real economic trade-off. Here's something with no label. Here's with the pretty Cyber Trust label. Here's with the black and white Cyber Trust label. Here's with the pretty Cyber Trust label and QR code. The 5 stars where we use the black Cyber Trust label to mean, bad. And then the same thing with the QR code. People loved, in this one, the Cyber Trust Mark because they were like, it's so pretty. And it doesn't have a QR code. So they liked that. But everybody liked the label they used because we had 100 people per group, per label. So at the beginning, they were like, what label do you use? And at the end, they were like, I like the one you sorted me randomly into. Hey, they're happy. So, they tend to like it. When we asked, half of them said they would definitely use a security label. About 33% said it would change their purchase decision. And then we said, if there's no security label, would it change your decision? And about 20% said yes. But the thing is, whenever they made a decision, we were like, why did you make this decision? Almost nobody said label. In fact, out of all the participants, 186 were like, I definitely saw a label. And half, that was 600, right? For those saw the label, did you use it? So that's 10% actually said they used the label. And then we were very sad because there was no difference between the groups. But when we looked at people who ranked cybersecurity and privacy as a reason for a purchase, there was a difference. They spent more time with the QR label, and they changed not just the mean was significant, but the distribution of what they purchased changed. So on average, they spent 17% more than people who said they did not care about security and privacy. So Did the organic produce change the hamburger market? Probably not. Does it empower people who want organic food? So consumers who value security will pay more. Minor exposure created a significant bias towards label design. And then the other thing is, this was not an Energy Star label test. They were like, Energy Star. I love Energy Star. Energy Star is so important. So, and that took 30 years, which I don't know if that's good news or bad news. It's important now. It took a while. And so labels can communicate security. Simple labels are easiest to use. QR codes are wildly contested. Consumers who value security showed a willingness to pay. Why do we want a label? That's a thing that's not often discussed. Like, here's the first aspirin label I could find, and it was like, how to take off the cap. And then here is an aspirin label for a hospital that has a deep presumption of expertise of the person looking at it. And here's our research. So this is recorded, so you can stop the recording and look at all these papers. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about some work that I did in collaboration with my former student Laura and Frances Haugen that probably many people are aware of. And so we set about this to kind of understand, recommender systems in the context of social media. And this is obviously a very important topic because these algorithmic feed systems are basically curating and the arbiter and mediator of a lot of conversation that's happening in the public sphere. These algorithmic feed systems were brought about as kind of a business tool, so they're designed to feed business goals of these social media apps. And from an academic standpoint, they're interesting because they're these multi-stakeholder systems. So normally when you think about a recommender system, you think about just two parties. But these systems have to balance, the consumers, the producers, the customers, oftentimes the advertisers, and the business goals within there. And unlike most recommender systems, they're not trying to optimize for relevancy or affinity. They're trying to maximize usage of the system. And so, there's increasing concerns over the harmful content that might be put into these feeds. These feeds kind of leading people to more extreme content and more dangerous content. And just yesterday, New York set about trying to restrict these algorithms. So for younger people's accounts, they were going to basically prohibit the algorithmic feeds and go back to a chronological feed within there. And I think, why we set about trying to build this taxonomy and demystify this is we felt like there was a lack of language to talk about the nuance and the designs of each of these social media systems. And so you end up with these laws that treat these systems de facto uniformly, whereas there's a lot of variation in the design of these systems. But it's hard to speak about that because we don't have the language and the taxonomy to speak about that variance within there. So hopefully this can be useful for future research trying to map design considerations with safety features of these algorithms, and also for policymakers and lawmakers that are setting about doing these kind of laws. And so what we did was a qualitative document study. We looked at 5 major apps. We excluded Instagram because Instagram largely follows Facebook, and we didn't cover ones that were in non-English speaking countries like the big Chinese social media apps because we didn't have the language skills to analyze the documents in those spheres. And so this is kind of the output of our qualitative document methodology. And so at a high level, we break the feed algorithm into these 3 different steps. So the first step is oftentimes the inventory selection. This is the universe of content that could possibly be shown to the particular user there. And some of this content is what we call connected content, or what the companies oftentimes refer to as connected content. This is stuff from people that you follow, or things that they've inferred from interests that you probably like. And then there's this unconnected content where they're just kind of fishing, and they're trying to discover new interests and things like that so they can keep usage high within there. So after the inventory, then comes the ranking. And there's two main ways of ranking content. And again, none of this is absolute. These are all blends of things. And so the two big ways is content filtering, where the ranking is done based on the content, features of the content itself, and collaborative filtering through, properties of the consumer, the producer, and the social graph there. And so these are the main inputs of the candidate ranking. And then probably the part that people are not aware of is there's a final feed assembly algorithm. And there's a lot of what these companies call business logic ingrained in this feed assembly. So this is where the ads get inserted into the feeds and content can be manipulated. So say, you have a big advertiser and you put their content to the front, or you have a narcissistic owner like Elon Musk and he puts his content to the front of the feed ranking algorithm. So there's this, it's not a pure recommender system. There's this business logic that gets integrated in the end of this system here. So talking about these as a recommender system is kind of a misnomer because of this big Frankenstein of lots of different processes. So this kind of brings right to the product and business goals again, right? These are for-profit companies that are seeking to maximize revenue while minimizing costs within here. And again, their primary source of revenue are these advertisers. As a quick aside, there's oftentimes two different classes of advertisers. There's what is referred to as the performance advertisers, and my mom, she loves penguins, so I'm always looking for novel penguin kind of gear to buy her as presents. And so these performance advertisers, might find some wacky sweater or scarf or something like that that has a penguin. They know that I'm always buying penguin stuff, and so they'll show that to me. They want an immediate sale. Whereas there's other advertisers that are brand advertisers, think like Coca-Cola and stuff like that, that probably most people aren't buying Coca-Cola through an advertisement there. They're building up brand recognition within there. And so the social media networks cater to the types of advertisers. So if you look at a company like Meta, they have a lot more performance advertisers than brand advertisers. And if you look at a company like YouTube, they have a lot more brand advertisers than performance advertisers. And this affects how their feed algorithm is composed. And again, the customers drive the design of these feed algorithms. And so one of the highlights of our study was the recommendation goals there. And so some of the main recommendation goals that we found were these trade-offs, where there was this trade-off between duration and intensity. And we found that, yes, this is a trade-off. So a company like YouTube optimizes for duration, and they take a hit in terms of intensity. Whereas a company like Meta, optimizes for intensity, but they take a hit on duration because really intense content you can't sustain for long periods of times. But this meets with their advertisers, right? The action advertisers, they want activity, they want that click and that purchase. Whereas YouTube has the brand advertisers, and they just want duration and long amounts of time on the platform. And then we see things like broad versus niche that are driven by the ranking and filtering, and then things like familiar and novelty, which show up in the inventory selection. And then we see things like recent versus perennial content. Apps like Twitter want to be the place of breaking news and things like that. And so they monkey with these optimization goals based on that. And so here's kind of a transparency card that we use based on this taxonomy. We haven't evaluated this. This is just kind of our first idea as to how we could do this, kind of inspired by nutrition labels as to how to expose this information. And this was the information from X, because X actually open sourced a large amount of their recommendation systems, so we could start to put some values on this. And so just to go back to the original goal, right, there's this obvious tension between growth and integrity here. And this comes up over and over, and so Meta's head of integrity says every time we test things, there always is this trade-off there. And so this is something that companies are just faced with. And the builders of these recommender systems, they're not out to build harmful products. They get led down this path because this is the path of growth within there. And these are for-profit, publicly traded companies, and so they have to serve their shareholders. And so oftentimes growth is trumped over other kinds of things. And so in conclusion, ideally we can have meaningful transparency of these systems, perhaps liability shifts, and ideally more nuanced discussions in all spheres when talking about the design of these systems. So we can start working out what design patterns lead to safer systems and which ones have less safe profiles.
Well, I was hoping to be the first one at the conference to speak about AI, but Sadia and Jeffrey took me so much on that one. But what I will talk about is AI security from the open source security point of view. So I always like to show this as one of my first slides because it really shows the permeation of artificial intelligence into a wide range of different industries. And this was actually something that was put out in 2020, before the advent of AI in 2022. So it actually shows that there was a lot of development in AI across a variety of different industries. I think it's important to talk a little bit about how AI security and AI operational risks have come to be in today's day and age. So if we rewind the clock to about 2015, this is about a year after I started my doctoral studies, really the pain for artificial intelligence was about how do you actually develop the AI model itself. So it was about how do you actually create the model, how do you train the model, how do you go ahead and deploy the model, and so on. But increasingly, what the distribution is starting to shift dramatically, where it's not so much about getting the model anymore, it's more so about managing the risks that are around the model itself. Because I can go to GitHub or to Hugging Face and just get a model right off the shelf and then start to be able to use that in different application areas that I so choose. So inevitably what's happened is that the impetus has changed from being able to develop the AI model to being able to actually manage the risks around that. And if we take a look at where AI risk can really be decomposed into, it can be broken down into operational, so this would be around the building, the scalability, the operations of the model itself. It can have some ethical issues, so this is where we commonly see like the bias issues and the ethics and the fairness and so on of these AI models. But there's also a lot about the security and privacy issues that come up about the models themselves, whether it be the source code, the data, the way that they operate, and so on. And that's the part that I'm going to be delving into a little bit more here today. So again, if we rewind the clock, about 10 years ago, the way of AI development, the way that it was occurring was that there were people that would go ahead and collect their own data, and then they would build their own models, support vector machine, a basic neural network, convolutional neural network, and so on. And typically these models would have small sets of parameters that they'd be trained on reasonably sized compute resources. You could train them on your laptop pretty easily. Today what's happened is that we have the era of large pre-trained models, where these models have now been trained on billions of data points, and they've also been trained on large resources and large sets of compute as well. Far more parameters than what we could train on our individual computers. And each type of paradigm is actually very valid today. We often hear a lot about these pre-trained models kind of dominating the world, but both paradigms are still very valid today, but they also have significant security risks associated with them. So this is something that was adopted from Gary McGraw at Berryville Institute of Machine Learning, which talks about the different types of risks along the entirety of the AI pipeline from the conventional point of view. All the way from the raw data to the data set assembly, to the learning algorithms, to the way that they get evaluated, the outputs, the inference, and so on and so forth. So there's different types of security issues that exist along the entirety of this particular pipeline here. But if we look at where AI models are at today with the pre-trained large language models and the pre-trained models themselves, there's a whole range of different security risks that are often associated with these models as well. And again, taking from Gary McGraw, he had come to Indiana University a few months ago on the like a day before the solar eclipse. I think, Gene, you had seen his talk as well, where it was talking about the different types of LLM risks that are often associated with these models. So this could be the integrity issues, the different types of prompt manipulations, and so on. So suffice to say, there's a lot of different types of security issues that exist with the conventional ways of doing AI, and then the more recent model, large pre-trained models. But one of the key issues in the literature right now is that there has not been a lot of work that's been done on measuring this at an open source, in the entire open source landscape. So there's been a lot of work that's come out about adversarial attacks on artificial intelligence. The left-hand side of the screen shows a rise in the number of adversarial example papers. A lot of work that's been done by industry on AI vulnerability tools and resources. Some AI risk management frameworks from folks at MITRE and at other institutes, and a lot of startups in the area as well. But when we look at the artificial intelligence landscape, there's the closed source models and then the open source models. Trying to map out what are the risks or the security issues associated with those models is critically important. So open source AI, there's a whole host of different open source frameworks that exist, whether it be PyTorch, TensorFlow, Keras, and others. And when you're a graduate student, you typically go to some of these resources to start to build out your models accordingly. But oftentimes these models have different types of issues associated with them. Now, everything that I'm about to say may have just gotten invalidated by Zinaida's presentation with CBSS scores, so take it with a grain of salt. So our first effort was actually, the academic community is one of the major providers of artificial intelligence models. So what we tried to do, we tried to collect a lot of data from the prevailing AI conferences such as ICLR, NeurIPS, ICML, and so on, extract out the GitHub repositories, do a lot of analysis on the metadata of the GitHub repositories, run vulnerability scanners on top of it, and ask interesting questions such as, who are the key contributors of vulnerabilities and what kinds of models, visualizing what the landscape looks like, and so on. And so, again, this is maybe all invalidated now, but what you can see is that there's a whole host of different vulnerabilities that come back. A lot of the high-level vulnerabilities, I think that the evaluators would agree that posting your API key and your username and password still constitutes a high vulnerability. So
we all agree on that.
Yeah, we all agree on that. So that is what we saw in the source code kind of landscape there. But that's the first category of AI models, right? There's also the pre-trained language models, or the large pre-trained models as well, where you're typically going to get those from Hugging Face. So Hugging Face has exploded. There's over 200,000, maybe even 300,000 models that are on Hugging Face now. So what our lab did is that we went ahead and we collected all of the Hugging Face models. We did a vulnerability assessment on all of them, and we presented this at DEF CON AI Village last year, and we incorporated the results into the AI Risk Database, which is a publicly accessible resource that was done in collaboration with MITRE and with Robust Intelligence that basically shows these models, shows the SBOMs associated with them, the vulnerabilities in them, and so on. And there's actually going to be a white paper that's going to be published as part of the NIST AI Risk Management Framework that shows our results on this as well. So last slide here, which is the kind of takeaway slide. A lot of details. I'm happy to share this content as well. One of the most vulnerable repositories that we found on Hugging Face was the Transformers repository. Transformers is key for what technology? Large language models. So you can see there's a whole host of different vulnerabilities that are in the Transformers library that are pretty bad, actually. There are a lot of really bad ones in there. But what makes it worse is that even some of the other peripheral components to Transformers, such as tokenization, being able to tokenize pieces of text, have a lot of vulnerabilities in them as well. The issue with that is that this propagates down into a lot of downstream applications. So now when you go back to that larger figure where AI is actually permeating, you're starting to see these vulnerabilities go into those applications. And I don't know yet what the effects of those are going to be. Thank you.
Yes. All right.
Yay. Okay. So I'm Stuart. I'm going to be talking about the unintended harms of security when security backfires. This is joint work with Serge in the back, in perfect location to heckle me. Okay, and so I advanced a slide without knowing it. Okay, there we are. So, is there?
I didn't set it, but hold on.
I think you pressed
With
the other
security
button.
backfires.
I think you accidentally pressed the button which says keep going.
You gotta talk
Yeah.
really fast.
What is it doing?
Might have saved timings.
Recorded. I don't think so.
Yeah.
There it is.
There you go. Okay.
Show media controls. I don't know what that is.
No, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Yes, I finally have control. So, talking about security backfiring, unintended harms. Security can fail in two ways, right? And most of us here talk about breaches, but it can also backfire. So we have security technologies, we put them in place, and they can cause unintended harm to the people that the security technologies are supposed to protect. We can lose data, we can be locked out of the things we need. And so we'd really like to know how bad is this at a macro scale, because usable security mostly looks at this at micro scale, and it's really hard to answer some questions at a macro scale. Whereas it's really easy to at least hear statistics, whether you believe them or not, about what happens in the scale of breaches. Verizon probably spent more money on the really nice like graphic designers to quantify how big breaches are and how they're happening than on the unintended harms of all the technologies we have to prevent breaches. And IBM, not to be outdone by another 20th century relic, also has their cost of data breach report from 2023. I don't know if these designers get paid more or less, but still probably more than the people working on the unintended harms. McKinsey, the folks who brought us the opioid crisis, they came up with that, how to sell the most OxyContin. They've understood that the security industrial complex is also a good place to be right now. So they're saying that if we believe them, the cost of breaches on the breach side is 10.5 trillion with a T annually. So if you want to sell CEOs on spending money, this sounds great. And I've got the painkillers if it goes wrong, so it's all good. So what I'd like to be able to know on the opposite side of the breaches is the unintended harms. How many million years of person years of photos are we losing when we get locked out of our accounts? How many email accounts are we losing? How many social media contacts? How many people can I not reach again for the rest of my life because I lost my contact information for them? How many people are missing appointments and not getting jobs because they can't get into their calendars when they need to, or because their navigation system locks them out because they haven't hit their PIN correctly when they're driving to try to get to the job interview? So what is this aggregate harm that we're getting from security technologies that no one's measuring? So how do we quantify that, and why isn't it being quantified? And Bruce, like the people we know, like we came up with like a lot of we got these lawyers to put in data breach notifications, and we had this great success. One of the big success stories, I think, of this community and a lot of the people here is that we have data breach disclosure laws. So half of the side of the way security fails, companies are required to tell us. And this keeps getting better, right? We keep getting more of these breach notifications. One of the speakers was talking about the SEC rules now. So on one side, they have to disclose the data. On the other side, we have no unintended harm law that when someone gets locked out of their account, if they're breached, the company has to report. Are companies going to report when there's unintended harms? Well, do cigarette companies report when their products have unintended harms? No. But if you get the numbers, then people are going to be unhappy with them. So the last thing you want to do is actually do the research to find out how many people are losing accounts and how many people are getting locked out of things, because if they have the numbers, then they can be upset about it. But if you never measure, it's not a problem. So it's just like the cigarette industry. So it's up to us, it's up to the public, it's up to someone else to measure how often things are backfiring. Try to figure out what the cost is to us all. And so that we can actually have a good discussion of what the trade-offs are and whether we're more security. We all need two-factor authentication. We all need this. Is it actually better, and do the trade-offs work for us? And so what we're doing to measure this is we're stuck using Prolific like most of the rest of you. So we're trying to get as best a survey as we can of folks in the general public and ask them, has this happened to you? Has that happened to you? And what we try to do is pair up situations where there's both the possibility of a breach and a backfire. So getting your device compromised versus getting locked out of your device, or having your email account compromised versus getting locked out of your email. So some sample security questions. Have you had an email or storage account compromised? And have you been temporarily or permanently locked out of an email or storage account for reasons other than it being compromised? And we like to be able to put these in context with sort of the larger harms being studied and try to understand, how harmful are these? And one of the challenges we ran into when we were first starting to think about this study is that it's hard to sort of put it in the other context of the other unintended harms of technology because no one's measuring those either. And so the way we designed our study is we do ask about all the specific scenarios, but the first thing we do is ask people very generally, no prompting first, please recall the 3 most harmful technology-related harms you've experienced, and tell us about those, and write us a few sentences about those. And then when we go ask them about these specific scenarios, we can say, was this among your top 3? Should it have been? Maybe it shouldn't have been. and get that data from people. And it looks kind of like this. So here we have bars. Sorry, it's small for the back of the room. The first set is device. There's 2 bars. The reason there's 2 bars is the left is people's experiences getting their devices compromised. The right is getting locked out. Accounts, social media, and so on. We also have things that aren't paired, having data lost when you replace or switch a device or you lose a device, broken promises where technology doesn't deliver on its promise, abuse and harassment, and we also are measuring just total harms that aren't related to a specific scenario. So lost photos, lost emails, and based on some really interesting answers to the first 3 questions, we found out a lot of people are now talking about mental health. Okay, and we also have Likert data. So I have about 90 seconds left with which I will take a 1-minute tangent. What's wrong with peer review? One of my favorite topics. Typically when we're doing HCI or when we're doing when we're submitting to Usenix security, we design a study, we run a pilot, we run the study, we run the pilot. Eventually, we run the study, document it, submit it for publication, peer review, public event if we're lucky, publication, community feedback. But of course, in that peer review step, we're going to get feedback like, oh, you should have done this when you designed the study, or you should have done that. And we say, well, the grad students already left. There's no money left for participants. And so we can fix the write-up. This is kind of dumb, right? So what we're doing here and what we want to see done is, hey, we redesign the study, we run the pilot, we document it, get community feedback, go back, redesign the study. Oh, we can then now run the study and so on. Of course, we might also want community feedback after we've redesigned to make sure we redesigned it the way we promised to, and then submit it for publication. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing with this research. Everything I've told you about, uharm.org. You can go there. Design's public, data's public, analysis code is public. You can rerun our analysis. Pilot notes are public. You know what we've been talking about. And so our study is at this feedback section. Please give feedback. And why give feedback? Well, everyone else here is going to try to recruit your top grad students. I'm not here to do that. If you help me, these companies are going to need people to produce the junk science that counters what we're finding about all the unintended harm. I can get your mediocre grad students hired.
Fantastic session. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to open it up for questions now. Okay, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Go.
So, question for Stuart. Maybe 2 questions, possibly related. Are you thinking about harms at like lost time as harm? Because oftentimes I just get false positives all the time, and I waste a lot of time proving that I'm me or I'm human. And that may not necessarily be lost forever stuff, but it still causes fatigue, just annoyance, all kinds of things, and a lot of time is lost as well in all of those things. So is that part of what you're investigating, or if not, how
It
would
is
that
people.
fit into your
It is people mention lost time, but we are going to undercount it because we do ask for the 3 worst. So everyone loses time, but in order to just the inherent design of this study, I'm guessing lost time. Like when people lose a lot of time, they report it. When they're losing 15 seconds a day, it's probably not going to be foremost in their mind compared to the other things they're giving us on the 3 worst.
Correct, but when you're looking at the scale of the problem, few people losing a lot versus a lot of people losing a little bit,
Yeah.
which of those 2 you think is going to be bigger?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We're likely to undercount it not only for that reason, but just because you think about your traumatic experience, you're gonna think about the moment that was really bad rather than the collective badness that has happened to you over time. So there's 2 reasons we could potentially undercount the impact. But right, our goal is to there's no perfect study design.
Would a study that studies the other aspects be complementary to your findings?
Of course, yeah.
Community feedback.
Yeah.
Very good. Instant community.
Search.
Yeah, so this is based on something Gene said, but I guess the question is broadly applicable. So I was actually trying to come up with a question that fits the topic of this panel. So Gene mentioned the Energy Star labels and how it took 30 plus years for these to become, recognizable and understood by the public. And that made me think about the fact that, in this community and the security community generally, a lot of people have talked about, a public health approach to security, where you have, similar public awareness campaigns. And I'm just trying to think how you can reconcile that. So if it takes 30 years for one of these campaigns to be effective, I'm not sure there's security advice that we could offer at this point in time that's going to be necessarily relevant 30 years from now. And going back to metrics, that begs this question of how do we measure whether security is improving if both the advice that we're giving as part of, say, a public awareness campaign is ever changing, and then presumably the metrics would be changing as well.
Please.
Oh. Well, you know this. Some of the frauds that we are fighting were actually invented, like what we call, 419, because it's in the Nigerian code, was invented in Spain when young English people went on the tour, right? And many of these frauds are actually quite well established. People used to send spam in letters, right? You used to get, and romance scams have just been made into a large-scale organization, with hierarchies and employment roles and tasks, and presumably they make the poor people they've kidnapped meet production goals, right? But many of these scams are quite ancient. So if we could just convince people, if you have a secret that is authenticating, do not share it. And do not send money to people you do not know. And the police will never call you on the phone. They're going to show up at your door. So those are 3 pieces of information that would have been actionable in 1890 and are still actionable. So it didn't, all right, so suppose it takes 30 years. So suppose we had started this in 1994.
It actually reminds me of something Ross said a year ago at SHB about, so the topic was about, Russian disinformation campaigns, and he was saying how, the real thing that needs to be done is, teaching critical thinking. And a lot of the Baltic states have latched onto this and are doing this because they're they've been subject to a lot of these disinformation campaigns. And so that might be something else, just critical thinking, which could be used to both identify scams, but also I guess disinformation is sort of a scam.
I bought a house recently sending money to someone I'd never met. So the escrow agent was someone I'd never seen in person.
Thanks for sharing.
So just quickly on that point, I think that's part of the problem, right? When we are coming up with policy solutions, they're based on, they're really not thought through. So you're talking about 30 years, right? 30 years is assuming that FTC actually has budget to do a public awareness campaign. They do not, right? Second, we are begging them to let us label routers. They're like, well, that's not a priority, right? So companies are actually going to them and saying, hey, we need to do something about the security of these devices. Can you please let us, you're putting together a program, put routers in there. And they don't want to do that because all of this advice is coming from some place that is completely disconnected from what is happening in reality. And this is why it is so important to have kind of local context for policymaking, which is not happening.
Thanks. Question about the AI security. So most of the issues that you talked about were about like Python code and C code, traditional vulnerabilities. And the AI community, I've been spending a lot of time in the AI community. They don't care about this. They only care about things like output control and jailbreaks and bias. Those are the security problems that they care about. So that's outside your scope of what the security problems are. And your problems that you're identifying are like, they don't care.
So how do you deal with that disconnect?
Yeah, it's under a larger theme of AI risk. So the pie chart that I'd shown about the AI risk, security is one component of it. Risk can also encompass a bias. So the bias is actually getting a lot of airtime right now in these communities of what kind of bias outputs are these models producing, as well as how can you prompt these models to produce biased output as well.
No, you're focusing on the bias, but I'm focusing on output control, which is that they see that as a security issue. They see it as a security issue if the model outputs its training data, if the model outputs credit card numbers, if the model's been told not to reveal private facts about people when it does. They see hate speech as a security issue, and it's called output control. Again, the risks that you are identifying are just not on the table for everybody I've spoken with, like doing companies that are doing AI. It's just not there.
Yeah, a lot of the airtime is being placed in those areas for sure, but there's a burgeoning set of startup companies that are also coming out that are focusing on the operational side of the AI development that are looking at the vulnerabilities within the models.
And we're investing in one of them, and they are not talking about the problems that you're talking about. It's a complete disconnect.
I agree with Sagar though. So if you look at Databricks, right? So Databricks is now offering models, and the whole idea is that if you use the model from Databricks, it is going to have some level of security guarantees built in. So don't pull your model directly from Hugging Face, use Databricks.
Mm-hmm.
But that just increases the cost of security.
I have Jeffrey Desari.
Yeah, so a question on the backfiring of security. So I'm just kind of curious what solution you would favor. So, I mean, something that comes to mind is kind of customizing the policies akin to how we handle cookies right now. Another thing might be investing in reducing the friction of current security approaches, or maybe a third thing. So I'm just kind of curious what you see as the best path forward in response.
I want measurement. We don't know how bad things are. And we've got an industry that I think was estimated at 180 billion in sales a year that has an incentive that is stop breaches, but we don't measure the other side. So you're always going to you can't balance and figure out what the right balance is when you can only weigh one side of the scale. We need to be able to weigh both sides of the scale.
Got it. So there could be a value such that you could say, okay, maybe we can give up a little bit of security because we're giving up so much just in terms of the friction and annoyance of security as it stands right now.
Or this current approach that's supposed to help is causing more harm than good, so let's not deploy it.
Yeah.
Right. The way we do with medicines.
That makes sense.
There's a really nice canonical paper on this called The True Cost of Password Policies by Angela Sassi. And I can't remember what year was that.
99?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
a
why
long
don't
time
you
ago.
go and find that paper and then look at the range of references and you'll find I think that's a good place to start.
Can I?
So
Can
I
I-
have a question for Damon. Actually, maybe two questions. So, well, I guess the first question is on one of your slides, you show that there are different, so kind of the platforms have different objectives when they prioritize kind of different things, right? So kind of like novelty and familiarity. So I'm thinking about kind of concerns about filter bubble, and I wonder what kind of websites are more likely to prioritize familiarity versus novelty. And related to this question, I want to kind of think about I want your thoughts on whether the differences is more connected to the revenue model, which would be more persistent, or does that have something to do with the algorithms that they're using, which I think would be a more temporary feature.
Yes, going to the novelty versus familiarity. I think this tends to occur in how they're doing the filtering. So things like content filtering, if you do just pure content filtering, then you're going to get the most globally popular content on there. So think TikTok. And then that whereas, a company like Meta and Twitter to some extent that do more collaborative social filtering, then as you define your community smaller and smaller, you're going to get more and more niche appeal.
I see. So it's more like something that is more specific to each algorithms.
Again, these are choices, and some of them are driven by consumer demand, and some of them are driven by advertisers and their need to get certain pre-filtered types of eyeballs there. And I think looking to the future, there's some of this that will be driven by the advertisers and what they want out of things, and there will be some of it, the consumers and the producers also have some say in the matter as to what they're interested in consuming and what they're interested in producing there. So, it's hard to predict the future. And, ideally, this is a living taxonomy where, some of these things didn't really exist. Like, there wasn't much content filtering done in the past, and now content filtering has exploded with TikTok, and everyone's copying content filtering. I think Meta has moved away from collaborative filtering to much more content filtering because they've seen the explosion in popularity that produces through products like Reels and things like that. So I think there'll be other discoveries in the social networking world that will add to the taxonomy, where there'll be new trade-offs that are discovered in there, and ideally those will be added as time goes on.
I'm going to give priority to Jean. Is that a follow-up? Yeah, so I think you were one of the authors of a paper about YouTube and your likelihood of hitting a fraudulent advertisement that says something about content filtering. That, if you could give us the 30 seconds on the paper and the concerns that it raised, I think that could also...
Sure, this hooks into some of perhaps the safety implications of this. So we did this study where we had like a control set of videos, there's popular videos, and then we had a set of conspiracy theory videos. And, we had sock puppet accounts that either consumed all popular videos or consumed all conspiracy theory videos. And we did some qualitative labeling of the ads that were shown to both of these different populations. And, very statistically significant, the conspiracy ones saw much more predatory ads there. But the problem with that study is it's hard to pierce through these algorithms to understand, because there's two parts of advertising delivery. There's what the advertiser criteria, and there's what the delivery optimization algorithms do. And so that study wasn't designed to kind of tease that apart. We're actually doing some follow-up work to try and tease apart the two contributors. But that could be an example where a recommender system had some bad safety profiles.
Yeah, I think that's something, so just to follow up, I think that's something that interests me in your data science study is that, well, you not only see the algorithm itself, but also see the business logic. So I wonder if it's possible to kind of utilize that to separate out the kind of pure supply side factors versus kind of demand side factors. I think it's always difficult for me to think about kind of the manifestation of the recommender result. It could be a combination of both supply side and the demand side, but the business logic part seems to be a pure supply side thing. So,
well, it's also demand driven by customers and things like that on the business logic side. So I don't think there's any world in which we can completely decouple these, but ideally we could get to more transparency, because I think that would be a useful starting point to understand. With our experiments, we could start mapping. Okay, this is the design, and this is with sock puppet accounts or data donation programs. We could figure out what designs tend to lead to what safety considerations.
Yeah. I guess what I meant by kind of pure supply side is kind of deviation from the kind of demand side factors. So, but I agree with you. Kind of.
I mean, again, it's a business, so the business isn't doing random things. It's driven by capitalistic incentives.
All right, I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead.
I have a small comments and also follow-up question for Stuart. Although before I say my comment, I'd like to ask that it not be recorded, or at least if recorded, not shared online, because this is a comment that is okay to share in a closed room, but not to the media, because it can be misunderstood. So if anyone's recording, please. Because this is not to be shared online, but it can be talked about in a closed room. I'd like to tell you that we actually measure almost everything you think we should measure, and it plays a lot in terms of, remember in my presentation, very last slide, I said, not everyone is ready for 2FA. I have a whole slew of stack of metrics of why this is bad for people, and number one request I get from every policymaker is, why don't we mandate 2FA everybody? We do mandate 2FA. We splice population, find a group of people who can tolerate 2FA, and then we mandate 2FA on them, but not everyone's ready. So we do. The problem with these measurements is, and this gets to the question, is we actually don't know which of these friction difficulty we cause is causing for the good people and therefore the inadvertent harm, or the friction that's caused to the bad actors trying to pretend to be good people trying to log in, and therefore part of the reason why we don't publish it is because we think it's too noisy, and every time we try to do research on it, it comes back unreliable data in terms of separating between the two. But that's because we don't talk to the individual victim directly. But to get to the question part, how do we explore which we should measure more than others in terms of harm? For example, there are times when we want to implement friction, and then if we do, it causes access loss, but it protects a certain individual from compromise. But then there are other problems of these things. We don't know if it's the compromise is really going to end up being blocked by some other things we do downstream. These are some of the, basically what we do is we do like stacked layer of defense, right? And so when we do, there's one metric we measure that's very interesting that says that if we slice properly, 2FA has zero effect. And nobody would believe if we come out to the public and says, technically 2FA doesn't add any security. But that's because if we slice properly, with this defense we put before it, with this defense we put after it, for this population, 2FA provides no security benefit. And then we get pressure from all sorts of sides of, why don't we just remove choice of 2FA for these people? But that becomes moral dilemma as well, because we don't know when these people are going to move out of that segment, right? So therefore, the question on the out of that segment of the people that 2FA offer no benefit, only frictions. So the question for you is, how do we deal with that dynamics, right? When we slice properly, every security protection offers zero benefit and all penalties, but we don't know when people are moving out of those dynamics. But on the professional side, if we measure too much, we run into this dilemma. If we don't measure, we may end up, not doing the right thing as per your thesis statement of not measuring the harm properly. How do we deal with that dynamic?
I think it's a lot like drugs that have side effects, right? There are some people you really don't want to give a certain drug to, and there are certain people who are going to be incredibly helped by it. And we let people and we let lawmakers make decisions about how this all works because we have data and there's public awareness about what's going on. But the fact that, right, for reasons we both know, no one wants to talk about the class of the harm they don't have to talk about. We can't even get to the point where anyone but your company can look at this problem and figure out what the right, how do we solve these dilemmas, right? So we want to be able to give the product to the people who don't have the side effects. We don't want to give it to the people who do have the side effects. And when it's a wash, then, right, who's to say it's a wash? Well, you're the only ones who can figure it out right now. It would be a lot better if we were talking about both sides of the equation with public data. Because, right, you not only have these problems and you have to figure it out, Microsoft has these same people going and figuring out the same things, and everyone's doing authentication a little bit differently and figuring out the same stuff and making the same mistakes. And the public pays for every one of these companies to go through the same set of mistakes over and over again.
So I guess to follow up kind of the question that you posed, I thought one of the problems in kind of the analysis that you described is that you define the user groups that are mutable. And in a lot of the targeted intervention, kind of well, heterogeneity analysis for targeted intervention, we will intentionally define immutable groups. So if this is a female, then it's going to be kind of like female for some time. We would never, for example, kind of design the user group using previous behaviors. So hopefully that would be kind of one answer to your question.
I have a question for Stuart. So you briefly watched, I think it was like a bar of people who had mentioned mental health as one of their top harms. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on that, since it seems like a pretty significant harm compared to all the other ones that were listed.
Yeah, I could. Or you could go to uharm.org. and I don't say this facetiously because my memory is not as good as this. You will, if you go to the lost stories section on the pilot report, you can read, it's from 30 participants. 3 of them we accidentally didn't ask about mental health, so the percentages have been adjusted. There are 27 people, I think 24 out of 27, you'll see mental health as one of the things they categorized by their story. And that data is much better than my recollection, and I could get you to it in 10 seconds if you open up a laptop. So,
thank you.
So, Stuart, this is a great panel. I have a question on the opposite side of that.
Sure.
It is 4:45, so I can ask that question. Do you think that anybody has ever benefited? I mean, I love that you're looking at indirect costs for this, but an economist would say the spillover effect, there might be a benefit to some people to lose contacts, like, I can imagine.
In the end,
I think
I'm going to take a data cleanse.
Yeah. Is it worthwhile to measure that as well?
You can add that question. Are there any contacts people you've lost that you don't regret?
Okay.
I'm
not quite.
Can I just follow up very briefly on that?
Quickly, because I have 3 already in the
The
queue.
right to forget, not the right to be forgotten, but the right to forget.
Yeah.
We need to look up on that. No, I'm serious. There's a literature.
Two things. So one, in response to Simpson's question to you, it's interesting but not surprising that the AI companies are focused on different threats and they're not interested in what he's talking about. But to me, that just sounds like that the market for lemons for secure software is alive and well. I mean, you've got essentially this AI developed software that's got run-of-the-mill vulnerabilities and obvious problems with it, and there's no commercial interest to do anything about it. So I think that to me that seems like a tidy explanation. To Stuart's discussion about harm and unintended harm, it sounds, and I think kind of like what Richard was saying, but a bit different. It seems like it would be great if we could measure these opportunity costs and quantify them better. We should do that. But if anything, that's just going to increase the number from 2 trillion to 2.6 trillion or some other. It's going to increase the overall cost of security beyond what we currently have today. But it seems to me we're still missing quantifying the benefit side, which is kind of like what Vaibhav was saying. We need to have we still need an accounting of which controls, what benefit they bring, because it may be that the benefits of certain controls outweigh the direct costs and the opportunity costs that need to also be measured.
Sure, but I can assure you the salespeople of all of these companies in this 2 billion industry will claim they have data.
Are you joking? No, they don't. I mean, they certainly don't.
I wouldn't trust the data, but they.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's saying that they have the data. What he's saying is that they will claim that they have the data, which is the same thing that you'll hear from the insurance people, right? So Professor Wolf talked about that the insurance people don't have the data, but I'll tell you, they came and testified in front of the NSTAC committee. No, testified is a very glorified word. Talk, proof. Thank you. And they all said that we have plenty of data. And then I asked them the question, okay, you have all of this data, here's an output variable. How much of your model actually explains this output variable? They said 10%.
Speaking of couldn't get past peer review.
Go ahead. Hi, thanks. So a really quick, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but also serious question for Stuart. did you think about measuring the unintended harms of security for cybersecurity professionals?
Yes.
No, we're trying to do again, it's not that I wouldn't love to, it's that, and the previous question was, like, when I was saying what we can't do, it's not that I wouldn't want to, it's that, yeah, we're trying to get sort of general public, big, this has been studied well at the micro level, we want some understanding at the macro level, and it's a great thing to do, would love to see it done. I don't see how we could integrate it into the current study, but if someone can figure out a way to do it, love to see it. And if not, then it's a great opportunity for someone else or a collaboration that I'd be involved in.
I don't know if this is, it's way too late in the discussion thread, but we were talking about a public health model at the beginning of all this. I just wondered if I could come back to that very quickly because I thought the points you made that fair following up. About 9 years ago, when I was helping to teach the International Cybersecurity program here at HKS, we had a little game to play, which is what is the international organization that's going to solve cybersecurity? What do you think is being discussed? And we got the WHO for cyber, the IAEA for cyber, the FATF for cyber. We have every single institutional model out there for cyber. Why? Because institutions need institutions as an answer. So when you ask the question, for instance, public health model for cyber, you will invariably get WHO as an answer. And this is actually not a hypothesis, this is a first-hand observation of what occurred from 2009 to 2014, including members of NCAP who were harping on the WHO model as the model that we should adopt for cybersecurity. And it took a bunch of, I'll say, apparatchiks in Europe to really push back at this because they had realized, based on experience in 2009 swine flu, that WHO might be something that is considered co-opted by their industry. And therefore, it's probably not the model we want to actually emulate for cybersecurity. And therefore, since that point forward, thinking about the public health model for cyber has been always associated with, yes, we don't want the WHO at the end of it, right? So when you think about institutional responses, or responding to institutions, think about institutions, and the comments beforehand, oh, we need to teach critical thinking. All right, the Balts have not, they copied their model from the Scandinavians and total defense system, which has been running for 40 years. So this is not new stuff for any of these countries, but they had to do it because they're a small nation in a very hostile environment. None of this is connected to actions, they're connected to institutions. The institutions they had back then were national security. I don't know if institution we want to introduce either into the debate, but all these discussions will always have an institution at the end of it, an institution frame, and luckily, very often it will be what else have we had. So be careful using certain models because, in particular, lawmakers are going to think in terms of what they already know. And WHO has been the model that a lot of us have been spending a lot of time pushing back on.
So, Vaibhav and me, you have nothing to say about cyber health.
Oh no, I was just going to. I think like any of these models, whether it's a public goods-based model, a private goods-based model, or a common pool-based model, they all have applications in different spaces, right? Like no one model is better than the other, worse than the other. It just depends on the context. Like for some problems you need a hammer, and for others you need a screwdriver, right? Not one is not better than the other. But I think like there is like a particular academics also have incentives, right? They want to push a particular idea that they have, and they want to see that made into policy. I think it's very reasonable, right? And I don't think it's coming from any place of like disingenuousness. I can't speak English, but I think they genuinely believe in it, but it's the evidence for it is not there. I think like one of the best sort of frameworks that I've seen in cybersecurity is the CIS framework, which is the only thing that I've seen close to having some kind of evidence or some kind of framework or some kind of theory behind it.
I think quickly, Jean, if you wanted to say something to wrap up.
Yeah, so long as you do not confuse your metaphor for the thing itself, these can be very helpful. So what I have taken from, the cyber health model is the concept of resilience, to try to understand what kind of factors underlie resilience and to understand what, for lack of a better word, I will use the flawed metaphor comorbidity. Like, are the people who are falling for phishing, the people who are falling for romance scams, who are falling for conspiracy theories and, buying gold or whatever predatory people sell. So I think that one of the reasons we are embracing the medical model is one, oh my God, peer review, maybe you can get them to accept a Bayesian analysis. And two, it generally has tools and methods of understanding that have not yet been applied. So as long as we understand it as academics, not as institution creation and empire building, but as a rich set of potential tools and methods for exploration. So I just wanted to make that connection. So when you hear an academic saying cyber public health, we do not mean, create who.
With that, let's thank our panel.